For 67 years, Mabel Rourke kept a secret that was not hers to keep. 67 years. She had kept it through 11 presidents, through the births of 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren, through the death of the man who asked her to keep it. Her husband, Harold, gone 6 years now, buried in a cemetery in Chattanooga on a Thursday in April with more people at the graveside than anyone had expected. Because Harold Rourke was the kind of man whose presence in a community accumulates quietly and is only fully counted when it is gone. She had kept it through the eulogies, which were true and were beautiful and were incomplete. She had kept it through 6 years of widowhood, which is its own country with its own rules, and one of the rules she had been following was the one Harold had asked her to follow on a winter night in 1957, 3 months after they married, when he had told her the one true thing about himself that he had never told another person, and then held her hands and said, "Promise me, not while I'm alive, not after, just keep it here, between us." She had promised. She had kept the promise for 67 years, 11 months, and 14 days. She broke it on a Wednesday afternoon in a television studio, into a microphone in front of 281 people. She did not break it loudly. She leaned toward Steve Harvey, who was crouched in front of her chair in the family section, who had come to her specifically because something in the way she was watching the stage had told him there was more going on in that seat than a game show, and she whispered 4 words into his ear. 4 words. And Steve Harvey, 56 years old, a man who has made a career of staying in a room no matter what the room brings, stood up. He stood up and he looked at the audience for a moment. And then he walked off the stage, not permanently, not in anger. He was gone for 2 minutes and 40 seconds, which the production team would later describe as the longest unscheduled pause in the show's recent taping history. When he came back, his eyes were red at the corners. He picked up the microphone. He looked at Mabel Rourke. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to decide right now in this room if 67 years is long enough." Mabel Rourke was 95 years old. She had promised a man she loved with her whole life that she would never tell. She thought about it for 9 seconds. Then she said, "Tell them." The Rourke family had come to the studio in 2 cars and 1 rented accessible van, which had been Mabel's granddaughter's idea and Mabel's objection and ultimately Mabel's concession. Because at 95 she had learned that some arguments were worth having and some were not, and an argument about whether she needed the van was not. She needed the van. She sat in the front passenger seat and watched Lowe's Angels go past the window with the focused attention of a woman seeing something for the first time and intending to remember it. She had grown up in Chattanooga. She had lived in Chattanooga for 87 of her 95 years. She had been to Atlanta twice, Nashville 4 times, and once in 1971 to Washington, D.C. for reasons she still considered private. This was her first time in California. "What do you think?" Her grandson Bernard asked from the driver's seat. "It's flatter than I expected," she said, "and the palm trees look like they're trying too hard." Bernard, who was 53 and had inherited his grandmother's precision with language, said, "That is the most accurate description of Lowe's Angels I have ever heard." The family team was 5. Bernard, his wife Sophia, a retired schoolteacher from Knoxville who had been studying for this the way she had studied for everything in her life, which was to say thoroughly and without apology. Their daughter Carmen, 29, who worked in logistics and had the organizational fluency of someone who spent her days moving large things efficiently through complex systems, Carmen's husband Mateo, and Mabel herself, who had been listed on the application as a team member and had said, when her family suggested she might prefer to sit in the audience section, "I did not come to California to sit in the audience." She sat in the family section adjacent to the contestant area because her mobility made the podium positions impractical, and the producers had arranged it quietly and without fuss, which Mabel approved of. She did not like fuss. In the green room, she had eaten 1 cracker from the tray and declined everything else, and spent the orientation briefing watching the producer with the steady, evaluating attention of a woman who had spent 40 years as a public school librarian, and had therefore spent 40 years determining very quickly whether a person knew what they were talking about. The producer knew what she was talking about. Mabel nodded once, which was her version of approval. She did not speak much in the green room. This was not unusual. Harold had been the talker. She had been the one who listened and then said the thing that mattered after everyone else had finished. It had been their division of labor for 59 years of marriage, and she had not changed it in the 6 years since he died because it was not a division she had adopted for his benefit. It was simply who she was. She sat in the green room with her hands folded in her lap and her small black purse on the chair beside her, and she watched her grandchildren and great-grandchildren prepare for a game show, and she thought about the thing she had been thinking about since the application was accepted. She had not decided yet what she was going to do. She thought it might depend on the room. Harold Rourke had been born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1928. He was the second of 5 children, the son of a man who worked in the steel mills and a woman who took in laundry and believed, without needing anyone to tell her, that education was the thing that moved families forward. She told Harold this when he was 7. He believed her. He never stopped. He graduated from high school in 1946, top of his class in a school that received a fraction of the funding of the schools across town, which did not stop him from reading everything he could find and learning the names of things with the appetite of someone who understood early that naming something is the first step to understanding it. He was drafted in 1950. He served in Korea for 14 months. He came home in 1952, and he did not talk about it. Not to his mother, not to his brothers, not to Mabel when he met her 4 years later at a church social in Chattanooga where she was helping serve the food and he was pretending not to stare. He did not talk about it for the rest of his life. This was not uncommon among the men who came back. Mabel understood this and did not push. She had learned in the first years of their marriage that there was a room in Harold that was always locked, and the room was Korea, and she respected the lock the way you respect a person's right to the places inside themselves that belong only to them. Then came the winter night in 1957. Mabel was 28. Harold was 29. They had been married 3 months. They were living in the upstairs half of a house on Magnolia Street that they rented from a woman named Josephine who lived downstairs and kept the heat too low and smelled of lavender and turpentine. It was February, a Thursday. She remembered the day because she had been trying to remember it ever since. The specific, unremarkable Thursday that turned out to be the most important night of her married life. Harold had come home from his shift at the post office. He was a mail carrier, had been since he came back from Korea, and he had sat down at the kitchen table and he had not taken his coat off. She knew from 3 months of marriage that Harold not taking his coat off meant something was working its way out of him. She put the kettle on and she sat across from him and she waited. He talked for 2 hours. She did not interrupt. He told her about a man named Caleb Washington. 22 years old, from Mobile, Alabama. Harold's closest friend in the unit. The one you chose, not the one you were assigned. The one who you traded food with and shared letters from home with and promised things to in the dark hours that you would spend the rest of your life trying to honor. He told her what happened on a hillside in November 1950. He told her that Caleb Washington had saved his life. Not metaphorically. In the specific, physical, irreversible way, putting his own body between Harold and a thing that would have ended Harold, and surviving it himself by less margin than Harold had ever been able to think about without his hands going unsteady. Caleb had lived. He had been evacuated. Harold had not seen him again after that hillside. The chaos of those months made reunions impossible. And then the war ended, and then the distance of ordinary life did what distance does. Harold had tried to find him. After Korea, he had tried twice, once in 1953, once in 1961. He had written letters to addresses in Mobile that went unanswered. He had made 2 phone calls that reached wrong numbers and one that reached a woman who said she did not know any Caleb Washington and hung up. He had never found him, and he had carried this, the debt, the unfinished accounting of a life saved for the rest of his. Why didn't you want anyone to know? Mabel had asked that February night in 1957. Harold had looked at his hands. Because if people know, he said, they say what a hero about him and they look at me like I owe something I can never pay back, and I'd rather carry it privately than have it turned into a story someone else tells. She understood. She had promised, but she had not been idle. Starting in 1962, quietly, without telling Harold, Mabel Rourke had been looking for Caleb Washington. Not constantly, not obsessively, but steadily in the way that a patient person pursues something important, through letters, through church networks, through the slow accumulation of information that the pre-internet world made slow and the internet eventually made possible. In 2019, she found him, or rather, she found his daughter. A woman named Ruth Washington, 68 years old, living in Mobile, Alabama, Caleb's youngest. Her father had died in 2011, 8 years before Mabel found his family, 5 years before Harold died. Mabel and Ruth had exchanged letters for 3 years, then emails which Mabel's great-granddaughter Carmen helped her with, then a phone call in the spring of 2022 that lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes. Ruth had known about Harold. Her father had talked about him, not to everyone, not to most people. But he had talked about Harold Rourke to her once, when she was 12 years old, and had asked him why he had a photograph of a man she did not recognize on the shelf in his study. He had told her the same story from the other direction. He was a good man, Caleb had said. I hope he had a good life. He had. In Mabel's small black purse, folded into a white envelope that she had carried since the morning she left Chattanooga, was a letter from Ruth Washington. She had not shown it to anyone. She had not yet decided if she was going to. The Rourke family played their first game with the focused, cooperative precision of a team that had rehearsed without calling it rehearsal. Bernard played captain. He was steady and quick, and had the low-key confidence of a man who had been underestimated enough times that he had stopped adjusting for other people's expectations. Sophia answered 3 questions that no one else in the family had seen and did not remark on this. Carmen managed the family section with the logistics fluency of someone who had built a career on moving things efficiently, and Mateo followed her lead without needing to be asked. They won the first game by a margin that made the opposing family, the Ray's family from Bakersfield, a warm, loud group who had arrived with matching shirts and left with their dignity fully intact, shake hands with genuine goodwill. During the break, Steve Harvey moved through the family sections. He went to the Rourkes last. He had been glancing at the family section throughout the first game, not at Bernard or Sophia or Carmen or Mateo, at the woman in the chair at the far end. The one with her hands folded in her lap and her small black purse beside her, and the quality of stillness that is different from patience, different from age, different from the comfortable inattention of someone watching something that doesn't concern them. This was the stillness of a person who was here for a specific reason and had not yet decided what to do about it. Steve Harvey had been reading people for a long time. He crouched down in front of her chair rather than standing above her, which was the instinctive adjustment of someone who has learned that the way you position your body when you talk to a person tells them whether you're talking at them or with them. "Hi," he said. "Hello," Mabel said. "You're the grandmother." "The great-grandmother," she said. "Though I try not to make a thing of it," Steve Harvey smiled. "How old are you if you don't mind me asking?" 95, she said, "and 3 months if you want to be precise." 95, Steve said. He looked at the family. "She came all the way from Chattanooga," Bernard said. "Chattanooga, Tennessee, 95 years old." He looked back at Mabel. "What got you here? What made you want to come on the show?" Mabel looked at him for a moment. She looked at her purse. She looked back at Steve Harvey. "I have something I've been carrying a long time," she said, "and I thought," she paused, "a room like this might be the right place to put it down." The sentence landed with a weight that was not proportionate to its length. Steve Harvey stayed crouched in front of her. "What are you carrying?" he said. She looked at the black purse. She looked at him. "Not yet," she said. "Let them play first." Steve Harvey stood up. He looked at the audience for a moment. He looked back at Mabel. "We'll come back to you," he said. "I'll be here," she said. The second game went to fast money. Bernard went first backstage and came back with 144 points, solid, clean, the answers of a man who trusted his first instinct and had learned that the first instinct is usually right. Carmen went second and added 63, 207 points. The $30,000 board lit. The Rourke family had won. Bernard grabbed Sophia's hand. Carmen made a sound that was approximately the sound of someone who had moved large things through complex systems her whole career and had just moved the largest. Mateo lifted both arms. And Steve Harvey, instead of going to the contestants, walked to the family section, to the chair at the far end, to the 95-year-old woman with the small black purse and the quality of stillness that had been telling him all afternoon there was something in that seat worth understanding. He crouched in front of her again. "You said you had something you've been carrying," he said, quietly enough that it was almost private. "Are you ready?" Mabel looked at the black purse. She was quiet for 6 seconds. "Yes," she said. She told him the shape of it first, not the detail, the shape. A man, a promise, 67 years. Something her husband had asked her to keep and something she had kept and something she had been thinking about since he died, in the 6 years of learning what it meant to be the last living person who knew a true thing about someone the world had loved. Steve Harvey listened without speaking. Then he said, "Can you tell me?" And Mabel Rourke leaned forward, and she whispered 4 words into his ear. The room could not hear what she said. The lapel microphone on Steve Harvey's jacket caught a breath and a consonant and nothing that could be assembled into meaning. The cameras held on his face. His face was the record. He absorbed the 4 words with the particular stillness of a body receiving something that has arrived faster than the mind can process it. The slight backward movement that isn't a flinch. The eyes that stop tracking and go to a middle distance that doesn't exist in the room. The jaw that sets and releases and sets again. He stayed crouched for 4 seconds after she finished. Then he stood up. He looked at the audience for a moment, not at the cameras, at the people, at the 281 individuals who had come to watch a game show and were now watching something else without being told the transition had happened. He set the microphone down on the edge of the stage. He walked off, stage left, past the lighting rig. past the floor manager, who did not stop him because the floor manager had been doing this job for 11 years and knew that there were moments in a taping that the production schedule did not cover, and this was one of them. He was gone for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. In the family section, no one spoke. Bernard had his hand over his mouth. He did not know what his grandmother had said. None of them did. He knew only what he had always known, that she was a woman who kept things, that she had always been a woman who kept things, and that whatever she had just given to Steve Harvey was something she had been deciding about for a very long time. Carmen was holding Mateo's hand without appearing to notice she was doing it. Sophia sat with the stillness of a woman who had been a teacher for 30 years and understood the difference between a pause that needed filling and a pause that needed protecting. The audience did not make a sound. 281 people in a television studio, and the only sound was the ventilation system and the faint mechanical hum of the cameras continuing to roll. Mabel Rourke sat in her chair with her hands folded in her lap and her small black purse beside her. She had kept the promise for 67 years, 11 months, and 14 days. She had broken it 4 minutes ago. She did not look relieved exactly. She looked like a person who has set something down after a very long time carrying it and is still feeling the shape of the absence in her hands. Steve Harvey came back. He picked up the microphone. His eyes at the corners were red. He did not explain where he had gone or why. He looked at Mabel. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to decide right now in this room if 67 years is long enough." Mabel held his gaze for 9 seconds. "Tell them," she said. Turned to the audience. He took one breath. "This woman's husband," he said, "saved a man's life and career in 1950, gave up something of his own to do it, something that cost him and that he carried for the rest of his life. And he asked his wife to keep it private because he did not want to be called a hero for something that felt to him like simply doing what needed to be done." The room was still. "He died 6 years ago," Steve said, "and she kept the secret through the funeral. Through the eulogies, through 6 years of people who loved him saying true things about him that were also, because of the secret, incomplete." He paused. "And she has spent those 6 years looking for the family of the man her husband saved, and she found them." Bernard's head came up. He had not known this part. None of them had known this part. "She found the man's daughter," Steve said. "A woman named Ruth, and Ruth knew about Harold because her father told her. Because Caleb Washington, the man Harold saved, carried Harold Rourke in his heart for the rest of his life the same way Harold carried him." He stopped. He looked at Mabel. "He had a good life," Steve said. "Caleb Washington had a good life and a family that loved him, and he talked about your husband. He told his daughter about the man on the hillside. He said—" Steve stopped. He collected himself. "He said Harold Rourke was the best man he ever knew." Bernard was not a man who came apart easily. He was 53. He had buried his grandfather 6 years ago and his father 8 years before that. He had learned across those losses that grief had its own schedule and did not particularly care about yours, and the best you could do was to be present for it when it arrived rather than trying to manage the arrival. He was present now. His face was doing the thing that faces do when something rearranges the thing you thought you knew about a person you loved, not grief, not exactly, but the vertigo of a familiar landscape suddenly revealing a depth you had not known was there. "He never told us," Bernard said, not to Steve, to Mabel. "Grandma, he never told any of us." "He told me," she said. "That was enough for him." "Did you?" He stopped. He started again. "Did you always know you were going to look for them?" Mabel was quiet for a moment. "I made him a promise," she said, "and I kept it. What I did outside the promise." She looked at her purse. "That was mine to decide." Steve Harvey turned to her. "You've been looking since 1962, he said. "On and off," she said. "The world was not easy to search in 1962. 57 years, he said. "I found them in 2019, she said. "I had help. Carmen helped me with the computer." She glanced at her great-granddaughter. "She's very patient." Carmen, in the family section, made the expression of someone who is trying very hard not to cry and is failing. "Why didn't you tell Harold?" Steve asked. "When you found them, he was still alive in 2019. Mabel looked at her hands. "He was not well by then," she said. "His mind was he had good days and difficult days, and I thought," she paused, "I thought the finding was for me, the carrying had been for him, the finding was mine." The room absorbed this. The logic of it, the quiet, private, entirely coherent logic of a woman who had spent 60 years honoring one man's wish while doing her own necessary work alongside it, landed in the room with the weight of something that had been thought through carefully and for a very long time. "There's something else," Steve said. It was not a question. He had heard 4 words. The 4 words had sent him off stage for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. There was something else. Mabel opened her purse. She took out the white envelope. She held it in both hands for a moment, the familiar gesture of this series of stories of people holding things that have been carried a long time before deciding to set them down. "Ruth Washington wrote me a letter," Mabel said. When I told her Harold was gone, when I told her the whole story. She looked at Steve. Would you read it? She said. I'd like someone to read it out loud. I've read it enough times in private. Steve Harvey took the envelope. He opened it with the careful attention of a man who understands he is holding something that has been waiting for this room for 6 years. He unfolded the letter. He read it to himself first. When he looked up, the corners of his eyes were red again. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. He turned to the audience. He read. The letter was not long. Ruth Washington had been a practical woman, the daughter of a practical man, and she wrote the way practical people write when they are saying something important. Directly, without preamble, without the elaborate construction of emotion that comes from people who are not sure the words are enough and compensate with more of them. Ruth's words were enough. Steve Harvey read them in the voice of a man who had set down everything he was carrying to be a vessel for something that belonged to other people. He read, Mrs. Rourke, I have thought for a long time about what I would want to say if I ever found the wife of the man my father talked about. I am not going to say it cleverly because I do not think cleverness is what this letter needs. He paused. He read, My father was a quiet man. Like a lot of men who came back from Korea, he kept most of it inside, but Harold Rourke he talked about, not often. But the times he did, it was always the same story, and the story always ended the same way. He said, That man chose me. When he didn't have to, he saw me and he chose me, and because of that I got to come home. The room was motionless. He read, My father married my mother in 1955. They had 4 children. He built a house in Mobile with his own hands over 3 summers. He was a deacon at his church for 31 years. He coached Little League for 12 years. He had 11 grandchildren, and he knew all their birthdays, and he never missed a single one. Steve Harvey's voice was steady. He read, None of that happens without the hillside. None of it happens without Harold Rourke seeing a man who needed to be seen and acting on it at a cost to himself without hesitation. My father knew that. He lived with that knowledge every day. And the life he built, the house, the children, the grandchildren, the 31 years of showing up at that church, that was the life your husband gave him. He stopped. He looked at Mabel. She was looking at the floor, not with grief, with the expression of a person receiving an accounting they have been waiting for, an accounting of something that was given a long time ago and has now finally been tallied. He read the last part. I don't know if your husband ever made peace with not finding my father. I hope he did, but I want you to know, in case it helps, in case it matters, in case you've been carrying this too, that my father found peace. He knew he owed his life to Harold Rourke. He said so. He said it to me. And he said one other thing at the end of his life that I have saved for this letter. Steve Harvey took one breath. He read, He said, Tell Harold's people that I never stopped being grateful. Tell them that a good man did a good thing, and because of it the world got more of what good men make. Tell them I hope he knew. Signed, Ruth Washington, Mobile, Alabama, with love for your family. Steve Harvey folded the letter. He held it for a moment. Then he looked at the audience, at 281 people who had come to watch a game show and were now sitting in the specific silence of people who have just been trusted with something that took 67 years to arrive in this room. Harold Rourke, Steve said. His voice was plain, no performance. Mail carrier, husband, father, man who did a good thing and asked for nothing for it and never knew if it was ever received. He looked at Mabel. He knew, Steve said. Ruth's father knew, and now this room knows, and that means Harold Rourke did not keep a secret. He left a gift. He just left it somewhere it took 67 years to find. Bernard stood up. He was not a demonstrative man. He had said as much across 53 years, in 100 different ways, in the careful precision of his language, in the way he moved through rooms without commanding them, in the fact that he had driven his grandmother across the country in an accessible van, and had not told a single person he was doing it because it had not occurred to him that it was the kind of thing you announced. He stood up because there was no other appropriate response to what had just happened. He looked at his grandmother. Why didn't you tell us? He said. The question was not accusatory. It was the question of a man trying to understand the shape of something he had not known was there. About looking for them, about Ruth. Mabel looked up at him. Because it was mine, she said. Harold kept it. I carried it. The looking was something I could do that was just for me. She paused. I've done a lot of things for other people in 95 years. The looking was mine. Bernard sat back down. He sat down the way a man sits when he has just understood something about a person he thought he already understood completely, with the specific, quiet adjustment of a worldview that has just gotten larger. Carmen, beside him, was not trying to manage her face anymore. She had given up on that approximately 3 minutes ago and had decided that was the right call. Sophia, her grandmother-in-law by affection if not blood, put her hand on Carmen's arm. Mateo sat with his hands on his knees and watched the woman in the chair at the end of the family section with the expression of a man who has just realized he is in the presence of a kind of love he did not know had a name. Steve Harvey crossed to Mabel. He crouched in front of her chair for the third time that afternoon. He looked at her at eye level, the level where the performance of television falls away and there is just one person looking at another. "How do you feel?" he said. Mabel considered it with the seriousness she brought to every question worth asking. "Lighter," she said, "and a little strange, like when you've been carrying groceries a long way and you finally put them on the counter, and your arms feel odd without the weight." Steve Harvey nodded. "That feeling goes," he said. "I know," she said. "I've put things down before." He handed her the letter. She took it with both hands. She held it the way she had held it before, carefully, with the attention of a woman for whom paper and words had always been serious things, for 40 years of library work and 67 years of keeping faith with one man's wish. She put it back in the envelope. She put the envelope back in the small black purse. It was no longer a secret, but it was still hers. Steve Harvey stood. He turned to the audience. He did not need to say much. The room had already received everything that needed receiving. What it needed now was a few words that acknowledged the weight of it without trying to summarize a thing that could not be summarized. "Harold Rourke was a good man," he said, "and he is known to be a good man now, in this room, on this day." He let that settle. That's because of her. That's what 67 years of faithfulness looks like. Not the dramatic kind, the everyday kind, the kind that just keeps going because it decided to. He looked at Mabel one more time. "Thank you," he said, "for trusting this room." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for going outside for a minute." The audience, which had been held in a silence unusual for a game show taping, unusual for a room of any kind, let go. From the back. From one person, then 3, then 20, then all of them standing, not because they had been invited to, but because the body does what the body does when it has been moved and needs to express it. Mabel sat in her chair and watched them stand. She did not stand herself. Her legs were 95 years old and she was being practical about it. But she smiled, the full version, the one that reached everything. The Rourke family won $30,000 that Wednesday. Mabel said when Bernard asked what she wanted to do with her share that she wanted it put toward the great-grandchildren's futures. "Which ones?" Carmen asked. "All of them," Mabel said. "Divided equally. I don't play favorites." She had one condition. She wrote a letter, not a long one, she was not a long letter person. But she wrote to Ruth Washington in Mobile, Alabama, and she told her that the story had been told. That Harold's name had been said in a room full of people who would carry it forward, that the accounting was complete. Ruth wrote back in 11 days. Her letter was 3 sentences. "My father would have been so glad. I am so glad." I think they would have liked each other very much if the world had given them more time. Mabel read it 3 times. She folded it. She put it in the small black purse beside the first letter. She did not think about what Harold would have said if he had known she'd told. She had thought about that for 67 years. She was done thinking about it. She knew what he would have said. He would have said Mabel in the voice he used when he was not quite annoyed, and then he would have been quiet for a while, and then he would have said, "All right." Because Harold Rourke had spent his life doing good things and not wanting credit for them, and at some point the goodness accumulates to the place where other people have a right to know about it. She had waited long enough. The episode aired the following spring. The clip that traveled, and it traveled very far, very fast in the way that certain things travel when they are true and human and completely without performance, was not the letter. It was not the standing ovation. It was the 2 minutes and 40 seconds of empty stage. Steve Harvey walked off, no explanation, just gone. And then the camera holding on the door he'd gone through and the audience sitting in complete silence waiting for him to come back, waiting for him. In the comments, a man who described himself as a Korean War veteran's son wrote, "My father never talked about it either. He died in 2018. I don't know if someone saved his life. I don't know if he saved someone else's. I will spend the rest of my life not knowing and trying to be okay with that." 1,700 people replied to his comment. Another wrote, "She kept the secret for 67 years and then spent 57 of them looking for the family anyway." That is not faithfulness. That is love, the whole thing, both at once. Another, "Harold Rourke, remember that name." Mabel did not see the comments. Her great-granddaughter Carmen offered to show her. "No, thank you," Mabel said. "They're saying nice things about great-grandpa Harold," Carmen said. Mabel looked at her. "I know they are," she said. "That's enough." She picked up her small black purse. She went to make her morning coffee. 1 cup now, she had adjusted. It had taken 6 years, and she was not entirely done adjusting, and that was the honest truth of it, that the things you carry for a lifetime do not disappear when the carrying stops. They change shape. They become something you can hold differently. She made her coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She thought about Harold on the hillside, about Caleb, about the house in Mobile built across 3 summers. About 11 grandchildren and 31 years of church and 12 years of Little League, and a family that existed because one man had seen another man and chosen to act. She thought, he knew. Ruth's father knew, and now the world knows. It was enough. It was more than enough. If someone in your life did a good thing quietly, if they carried something without wanting credit, if they chose someone when they didn't have to tell the story, not for the drama of it. Because good things done in silence deserve to be known, eventually, by the people who come after. That is not a betrayal of the quiet. That is the point of it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. We find them every week, stories about people who carried things and what happened when they finally set them down. We'll be here.